Welcome back, everyone. Law Professor Dr. Scott Gerber is back with us today from ONU. He recently had an article written about a book that he had read and gave his review on that. David Bernstein wrote a book about racial classification in America, which is fascinating. Some of the highlights you pointed out. It talked about whether politics was used, or in the case of Hispanics, where basically the language you spoke was used for that classification. I guess the overall sense from what I get from you and from the author himself is that there's really no rhyme or reason for it, is there?
Correct. Bernstein goes through an avalanche of evidence and demonstrates beyond any doubt, in my reading anyway, that these classifications by the government are arbitrary and incoherent. You had mentioned the Hispanic category. Just because someone speaks Spanish doesn't mean that they share the same traits as someone else that speaks Spanish. If one is from Spain and the other is from Mexico, for example.
One of the ironies, too, that you both point out is that a lot of the classification is based on, going back to the civil rights era, on basically stereotypes, and that things really haven't changed much into the 70s and the Carter administration from that period.
Yeah, what was news to me and quite shocking, frankly, were two things. One, that it was during the Carter administration that there was this thing called the Statistical Policy Directive number 15 that the Carter administration released in 1977, imposing racial categories for data collection purposes only. But the Carter administration said, don't use them for any other reason. But then the government started using them immediately for deciding which groups were eligible for affirmative action preferences.
You know, one of the side notes that I found fascinating, and I'm sure Senator Elizabeth Warren is not a big fan of Bernstein, because he called out the whole notion of whether she had any links to being Native American. Talk a little bit about that and kind of where that feud started.
Yeah, well, she claimed when she was trying to get a job in legal education, which is very woke, as they say, that she was part Native American, and she's not. And so Bernstein demonstrated that she wasn't, and that helped her get a job eventually at Harvard, of all places, which is a great law school, of course. And then at the end of my piece, I mentioned that if we're allowed to just self-classify, my stepmother, who's been married to my father for 25 or so years, she's Black. So if I start self-identifying as Black, because I talk to her all the time and I understand what she's gone through historically and all that, if I'm allowed to self-identify, as apparently I am, then that would increase my odds astronomically of moving up to Harvard, to teach at Harvard, that kind of thing.
Well, and I was remiss in not mentioning the fact that the reason we're talking about this is that the Supreme Court probably in October is going to be taking up the cases of at least two major colleges that are talking about whether race should be involved in the admissions process and other aspects of college life at all. Do you get a sense of how the court will rule? And if so, how much will Bernstein's book or maybe just that philosophy have to play in it?
Yeah, I'm pretty confident, and I'll bet you 7 pizzas that the decision's going to be 6-3, forbidding the use of race in higher education admissions decisions. And the cases are out of Harvard, coincidentally, which is private, and then out of the University of North Carolina, which is public. So they'll get them both through Title VI for the private school, and then through Equal Protection Clause. And they reached out to take it. And so as we saw in June, Jeff, and we talked about this, if they're willing to overrule Roe v. Wade, which a majority of the American people support, they're going to be willing to overrule the use of race in admissions process, which the majority of Americans don't support. Higher ed is gaga for these things, but the majority of the American people, poll after poll demonstrates, oppose this. They want people judged on the merits, especially when it doesn't make any sense and you end up discriminating against other people. Like at Harvard, the argument there is that Harvard is discriminating against Asian Americans because they're scoring very well on the LSAT and the SAT and also on the great GPAs and stuff, and they're not getting admitted in the percentage of terms that those merit-based evaluations should get them accepted. based on.
Yeah, it sounds like the court will, the majority anyway, will say in better legalese that the nation needs to get out of the classification system. They'll say it much better than I can. Dr. Gerber, as always, we appreciate it. Thank you so much.
All right. You're welcome, Jeff.
You bet. Nice chatting with you. We'll be back right after this.